I've read my fair share of something that could loosely be called racial satire. And it's not something that's easy to do. I'm thinking of Percival Everett's The Trees, which combines satire with a little bit of horror and a police procedural. You have the 2021 National Book Award winner, Hell of a Book by Jason Mott, which reminded me a lot of the 2020 National Book Award winner from Charles Yu called Interior Chinatown. But for me, the high watermark in this genre is still Paul Beatty's The Sellout. Fantastic read. Absolutely loved it. And that's an opinion shared by Elaine Hsieh Chou, whose debut novel, Disorientation, I absolutely devoured. It's no sellout, but it is easily my most favorite read of this most recent genre. We're introduced to 29-year-old PhD candidate Ingrid Yang, who is in her 8th year of a disastrous dissertation on the late Chinese-American poet Shou Chow. Something about how his formal stylings are intimately tied to his linguistic heritage as a Chinese-American born of immigrant parents. Chow is known as the Chinese Robert Frost. He writes accessible poetry about teacups and rivers. I mean, his quotes adorn walls of dentist offices and middle-class homes. You can find little snippets on tea boxes and watercolor calendars, and probably an entire universe of desktop wallpapers. And maybe because or in spite of this ubiquity, Ingrid is having a hell of a time with her dissertation. She's facing mounting student debt, a likely ulcer, a growing addiction to her allergy medication, aggressive eczema, and the growing realization that maybe she's just not that into Chow. I think she feels a little coerced into it by her East Asian Studies chair, an academic weeb, otherwise known as Michael Bartholomew. You just imagine this sort of 60-year man with gray hair tied in a loose ponytail, sitting in his minimalist office pouring Gaoshan tea with the sound of a fake bonsai Zen garden fountain burbling in the background, and watercolor calendars with koi fish entwined in a yin-yang pattern. So yeah, all of this is leading to Ingrid, frankly, hitting a wall. She's just not written anything and is no closer to finishing her dissertation. At least outside of school, things are going a little bit better for Ingrid. She's engaged to be married to the perfectly plain Stephen Green, with his generic features, his mild tinnitus, his lactose intolerance, and his public radio-friendly voice, which he uses to denounce toxic masculinity. He wears plain clothes, has plain glasses, plain socks, which renders him the air of an unremarkable passerby, or, in certain dark, shadowy conditions, someone on the sex offender registry. But it's fine. Ingrid is happy, especially after her overly clingy and codependent string of relationships that have ended in disaster. Stephen seems wonderful. He actually asks how her dissertation is going and listens as he works on his first Japanese to English translation of a book called Pink Salon. So, against this backdrop, Ingrid stumbles upon an enigmatic note in the Chow archives which sends her down a different path, in which shenanigans ensue. Satire is hard. If the last few years have shown us anything, is that fact is kind of stranger than fiction. I keep thinking about Margaret Atwood dismissing sci-fi as nothing more than talking squids in outer space, and that she wrote something more like speculative fiction, things that are likely to happen or things that are already have happened. And I think satire does the same thing. And half the fun of reading Disorientation is finding the real world corollaries for the things that happen in the book. Okay, so spoilers, although not technically spoilers, because I think this is the inciting incident that sets the story on its path, because after all, this isn't some PhD campus novel like Weike Wang's Chemistry or Brandon Taylor's Real Life. This is, I think, more closely aligned to the Netflix series The Chair with Sandra Oh. But anyway, spoilers, or not spoilers, I don't know, but Shou Chow, the Chinese-American poet, the esteemed member of Barnes University's faculty, the subject of Ingrid Yang's painful dissertation, is in fact a white man with a white man name-having name, John Smith, who is very much alive. And this prompted a ton of open browser tabs. Back in the 90s, the poetry world was singing the praises of a Japanese poet by the name of Araki Yasusuda. He was a survivor of the bombing of Hiroshima. He would lose his wife and youngest daughter immediately in the blast, and he would lose his oldest daughter to radiation poisoning 4 years after the bombing. And he would write about the bombing itself and his isolation in a small town in an avant-garde style that got him translated and published in numerous poetry journals, and they were looking to collect his works in a compendium for publication. until it was revealed that Yasusuda never existed and that he was a complete fabrication. And although he denies it to this day, it's likely an Illinois University poet and professor with the equally generic white name having Kent Johnson. Anyway, obviously the poetry world was up in arms and enraged by the deception, but there was an equal number of individuals that felt this portrayal of the horrors of war and human suffering written under a pseudonym was a brilliant nod to post-structural criticism's granddaddy, Roland Barthes, and his notion of the death of the author and a bunch of academic woo-woo, but you get the idea. And then there's Yi-Fen Chao, who appeared in 2015's anthology Great American Poetry with his poem, The Bees, the Flowers, Jesus, Ancient Tigers, Poseidon, Adam and Eve, which turned out to be the creation of a very white Indiana poet by the name of Michael Derrick Hudson. He'd been passed over well over 40 times with this poem. And instead of just going back to the well and, fixing it, editing, he decided maybe he'd have a better chance if he went full-on Asian and submitted it. And so we have this incel QAnon Zack Snyder extended cut loving poster child of white mediocrity that decides, let's go full-on yellowface and submit this, and feels vindicated when he's published. And it's just this impossible situation for the editor of the anthology, which was the Native American writer Sherman Alexie, who's just trying to better showcase poetry from women and people of color. And so this landed on his maybe pile, and he found it interesting, this Chinese American poet, so clearly interested and obsessed with European classical and Christian imagery, and he liked that sort of cross-cultural intersection that was happening there, but I don't know, it's just turtles all the way down. And finally, you have Marvel's current editor-in-chief, Winchester B. Cebulski, who for a time wrote under the pseudonym Akira Yoshida, which is basically the Japanese equivalent of John Smith. He wrote for some top-tier titles like Wolverine and Thor, which of course included lots of ninjas and yakuza and samurai swords. And all this was coming to light as he was being promoted to editor-in-chief. And Cebulski denied it all at first until it got to be too much and clear it was in fact him, and so he fessed up. And despite all of that, it had no effect on him actually getting and retaining the role, despite the fact that this has a Dakimakura full-body anime pillow at home. And that's just one plot point that Chao managed to explore a little bit. There is also the red pilling of the East Asian chair, Michael Bartholomew, and I can't help but be reminded of one University of Toronto psychology professor who spent a decade selling a psych assessment hiring software tool that through a series of computerized tasks could determine whether a candidate was a good fit for the job and how well they would perform at it. The software never sold, took too long, the results were questionable at best, but you need not worry. All it took was a viral video and a bunch of anti-trans screeds, and Jordan Peterson suddenly became the internet intellectual of the day, with millions of rabid online fans, a #1 best-selling self-help book, and a net worth well over $10 million. And so, while I felt that Bartholomew was a bit of a stretch in the story, I still can't help but think of this overly earnest psychology professor initially interpreting Jungian dreams, suddenly becoming a barbiturate, addicted troll who insists that feminists have an unconscious need for brutal male domination and that white privilege doesn't exist. Peterson would play a role in my own backyard and show how university campuses could be gripped by partisan politics. This was a result of a graduate student by the name of Lindsay Shepard playing a few snippets of Jordan Peterson in our communications classroom, and this thing blew up as a result, leading to accusations of fostering a toxic environment, defamation lawsuits, secret recordings, and an issuing of a completely made-up Canadian award. Things do get a little wild in Disorientation, but I think it has to do that to separate itself from fact. And there are accusations online that the protagonist, Ingrid Yang, is a little too slow, a little too clueless, and that her racial awakening is sort of messy, complicated, and contradictory, but it kind of mirrors my own. I mean, I get it. I understand Ingrid and where she's at. I understand that this generation right now really is well versed in the notions of the model minority, microaggressions, minor feelings, internalized racism, that notions of race and identity are being had out loud, online, completely accessible, but that wasn't the case for me growing up. And so her journey scans to mine, and I didn't even want to get into that rabbit hole of MR Asians and red-pilled POC conservatives. I liked it. I liked Ingrid's friends. I liked the activist frenemy Vivian Vo, as well as the kawaii best friend Elaine Kim. Yeah, they get dialed up to 11, but I don't know. I just like them warts and all. Flaws in everything. Her journey scans to mine, and I appreciated that. This feels like such a debut novel. Elaine Hsieh Chou is just throwing everything on the page, and some more elegantly than others, but I was invested in the story that she was telling and a lot of the beats that she was laying down. I really did enjoy looking up the real-world corollaries for a lot of this. Anyway, Disorientation, I really did enjoy it. Honestly, I was prompted to do this because I'm going to have to get behind the camera this coming week at work. It's a new lens, it's a new mic. I'm seeing if this is going to work at all. I've got a lot of redundancies in place, so we'll see what happens in post for this. Meanwhile, counting down the days as we, as a family, head off to Europe. Our daughter is going to Marburg, Germany for a semester of school. Marburg is the home of the Brothers Grimm. Now I know, initially we thought it was going to be South Korea. She's disappointed. We're a little disappointed, but she's already visited South Korea. She's seen that side of the family. It's wonderful now to see the other side of the family, on my wife's side, her Dutch-German heritage. So we're going to, of course, be in the Netherlands and visit Amsterdam, Haarlem, and I'm very much looking forward to visiting Delft. But we are going to have a chance to meet face-to-face, in person, for the first time. Friend of the Discord, John Pascoe. Very much looking forward to that, where he works at the University of Delft. We'll also make a little jaunt over to Frankfurt, Germany. Again, if you have any experience with these places at all, recommendations, things to see, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear it, though frankly I've got quite the packed itinerary going already. Anyway, we really are looking forward to that. Hopefully all the travel stories that I've been hearing online on the news will have abated by the time we head out there. Anyway, that is it for me this week. I hope you all had a great week of reading, and I'll talk to you again soon.